Yeah.
I got to tell you, there's nothing like it in the world to be free. To drive down the road with your passport, to how to handle them. You know, I got a letter that was written in 1985 from an Arizona senator telling the police departments of Arizona that it's perfectly legal to use a passport on the roadways. I mean, I guess I rarely get stopped because they'll put my license plate on my truck, but sometimes when I'm in rental cars, I'll get stopped because, you know, I don't care too much about their statutes. And I like to, it's my opportunity to teach. That's my theory, okay? So anyway, I was in Utah, and I was going to go see somebody in jail in Duchesne County, Utah, and I almost to town, and I come up this hill, and I go around the sharp corner, and there's a cop sitting there. I'm probably doing 20 miles an hour on the speed limit. And I see him whip out, so the first thing I do, here's how I throw him off every time. I put my brakes on, and I pull over as quickly as I possibly can, as safely as I can. Now he has no time to run my plates.
Yeah,
And then I roll the passenger window all the way down. And he walks up to the passenger window, right? I say, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? I'm the nicest guy in the whole world, right? And he says, do you have a driver's license, proof of registration, insurance? I say, of course I do, officer. Doesn't everybody? I use them every time I'm driving my Uber. But right now I'm traveling. I'm driving in my private automobile. Here's my passport. It's the only documentation I use.
Like getting a passport, can you rescind having a driver's license and just use a passport? When you get your passport?
If you don't ever plan to be in commerce, if you're not going to haul goods or services for resale over interstate lines, if you're not a public officer in the performance of their duties, or you're not hauling people for hire, then you don't need a driver's license, you need a passport.
Officer Banks, Golf Breeze Police Department. I'm pulling you over, you're doing 54 and a 35. Any reason for that speed tonight? Before you got off the bridge, and as soon as you came off the bridge. All this is 35.
I was going 40, I thought.
No. You got your license, registration, proof of insurance.
You don't have to have a license to drive a car.
Yes, you do.
You do not.
15-7, sovereign supervisor, sovereign citizen. No, you need to step out the vehicle right now. Young lady, step out the vehicle. Step out the vehicle. Last time I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to make you step out the vehicle.
You're going to get me a supervisor out here right now. I know my rights.
What right is that?
I do not have to have a driver's license to drive a car. I am not, this is not a commercial vehicle.
Okay.
I know my rights.
Okay.
Very well.
That's what you want to stick with?
I don't have to give you a driver's license to drive a car. This is not a commercial vehicle.
Okay.
I'm not driving, I'm traveling.
Okay.
I have all the laws back here.
Okay. So you're not going to give me a driver's license?
I'm not going to give you a driver's license. I don't have to give you a driver's license.
Okay.
I'm traveling. I don't have to have a driver's license to drive a vehicle.
Okay. In what state is that?
Any state. It's common law, natural law.
Okay.
Constitutional law.
Okay.
You need to get a supervisor out here.
I do?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you are going to jail tonight.
Well, thank you, Sergeant Turner.
You're welcome. What we want you to understand is there are laws that you have to follow. Whether you agree with them or not is a moot point. Because if you choose not to follow them and you continue to act like this and do this, you're just going to constantly be going to jail.
Okay,
you're not the first one.
You're
not the first person I've run across that thinks this way.
Well, there you have it. That's just a sample of some of David Lusher-Straight's idiocy. You can consider this video a public service announcement in case you or anybody you know are getting the urge to have anything to do with this pathological liar, idiot extraordinaire. Delusions of grandeur. I'm not just going to allege to you that everything he says is an absolute lie. I'm going to show you in this video. I've been through hours of his lectures online, which people are paying $200 to $250 to be just lied to constantly. And what you just saw in the video is a result of people believing his utter nonsense. Driving without a license is one of the more common claims of the sovereign citizen movement. And it comes from one particular United States Supreme Court decision, which does say that it is your constitutional right to move from A to B unhindered. But what they don't tell you is further down the decision, they also go on to say that since driving could be such a potentially hazardous activity, it's not unreasonable that the states would do something to regulate it to make sure that if you're going to be hurling a 2-ton steel box down the road at 60 miles an hour, you kind of know what you're doing. So yes, in fact, you do need a license. So what you're going to see now, this is about as primitive and raw a video you're going to see on YouTube, because I want this to be completely transparent for those of you who believe that David Lester Straight knows anything about what he's talking about. I know some of you would consider him to be the Messiah, going across the world, saving all these people, saving all these children from CPS. He claims that he led the FBI in a raid where he took them down into the tunnels underground, where he saved 2,100 women and children who were breeders for the sex trade that the government is keeping and breeding these children for the sex trade. They have coupled now with the equally as brain-damaged QAnon movement. So that you can see me put together this video right in front of you. I have a monitor here, I have a monitor here, and we're going to watch this video that has been edited down to about 30 minutes through DaVinci Resolve. We're going to see it on Windows Media Player. Occasionally I will be pausing it and showing you the actual truth of just lie after lie after lie. And I hope you enjoy yourself. I know I'm going to. So let's get started. I'm going to shrink myself down over here, and I will be here, because everything you're going to want to see is up here.
They paraded her around for 2 years, and if you could close your eyes and picture the most perfect school teacher in your mind, that was Jane Spalding. She literally was next to perfect. And they said she was going to be the head of the Department of Education. That's what she was sold on. So April 11th, 1953, the 50th state finally signed off.
Okay, let's stop right there. She was going to be made head of the Department of Education in 1953. The Department of Education was began operating, as you can see here, in 1980. There was no Department of Education in 1953. He claims that the 50th state signed off on it, okay, when we all know that in 1953 there were only 48 states, because it wasn't until 1959 that Hawaii became a state, and Alaska did also in 1959. There weren't 50 states. 1953. Now let's hear more about Jane.
They made Jane Spalding the head of the Department of Education. 49 days later, the President of the United States fired Jane Spalding.
Here's the Jane Spalding he's talking about. Quite brilliant, and you can see right here, Jane Spalding, quite brilliant. In 1953, she became the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. There was no Department of Education, of course. We just saw that, and 49 days later, he claims that she was fired. She was actually appointed to her third position in the Eisenhower administration, consultant with Foreign Operations Administration.
And appointed Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller to run the Department of Education. And during his acceptance speech in front of the media, which was a group about this size.
Because he
so
was
we were
there.
all media, and I was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. This is about the way the group was. And he stood up there at the podium, and he said, "I consider this the greatest position in government." And the reporter's hands all shot up, and the flashbulbs went off. And the first reporter asked, "Why do you consider this the greatest position in government? Greater than the President of the United States and the Vice President?" And he said, "Absolutely. This is the greatest position in government." And they said, "Why?" "Because you give me 1 decade, 1 generation, and I'll change the minds and therefore the direction of the world through the Department of Education." And it took him 8 years. It didn't even take him 10.
Took him 8 years. Didn't even take him 10. God, he's such an idiot. Oh, my goodness. Here we have the infamous Nelson Rockefeller that he's talking about. And in 1953, he in fact took over the job of the Undersecretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. And he did it till 1954. Not 10 years later. It didn't just take him 8 years. He was only there for a year and a half, maybe. Everything that comes out of his mouth is an absolute lie.
By the end of the 8th year, every school in the United States had, I'm going to call them propaganda textbooks. I can get any history book and I can tell you that the whole thing is full of lies. So let's talk about good old honest Abe, right?
Let's.
He was a bar association attorney, lived in the state of Illinois. Go to the state of Illinois' website today. Go to the Office of the Attorney General.
Okay.
Click on the History tab, and it says the Office of the Attorney General of the state of Illinois was put into place to protect and uphold the interests of the Crown.
Oh, no. It's a scam. The interest of the Crown. These people of the sovereign citizen movement have this crazy idea that the Bar Association is actually an English or British organization that has taken over America and is controlling us to the core. So you hear them talking about the Crown in England and how we're, all being corrupted by that. So let's go to the History Office of the Attorney General in the state of Illinois, like he said. And he said that they're here to serve the Crown. Now, let me see if I can find that. Office of the Attorney General for scam doing existence, blah, blah, blah. Office has increased in size and importance. Okay, there is the Attorney General. Some links, file a complaint, previous. I don't see that, of course, because it doesn't exist. He's a nut.
The Crown Inc. Okay? Good old England and its monarchs. That's what the Crown Inc. was the very first corporation in the world. So let's talk about Abe a little bit.
Let's.
He was a follower of Karl Marx. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 18...
See, he tries to make Lincoln out to be a communist, but the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of brilliant economists, including Milton Friedman and his predecessor, the more brilliant Thomas Sowell, who at one time did consider some of the aspects of Karl Marx's socialism. Back when Abe was alive, Karl Marx was the first person and the only person to have some new paradigm of economy, being that with the Industrial Revolution coming about and the neo-feudal society created, he was the only one who came up with some other idea. So that's why you hear people saying this and that about Karl Marx, particularly back then, because that was the only other idea they had.
48. Okay? He passed a whole bunch of communistic laws that are still today screwing up Illinois. Okay? Terrible state to live in. And they're still screwing up Illinois. I'm going to be there on the 19th of this month, speaking in Chicago. And he messed it up. He was governor of Illinois, and he ran for president 5 times, and he failed.
5 times? Oh, my God. He obviously didn't even open the simplest of books. Abraham Lincoln ran for president 5 times. Here we have just a simple page on Quora. How many times did Lincoln run for presidency? And of course, he only ran twice. Only twice, in 1960 and 1964, freelance public relations specialist. Let's see who else answers this question. Professor of political science at the University of Maine says twice. He ran for president twice, not 5 times. Ridiculous.
Not the story at all that we put up on Mount Rushmore. In fact, he wrote a letter that said, if it was up to me, I never would have freed the slaves.
Ridiculous.
The words right out of Abe's mouth. He never would have freed the slaves. Civil War wasn't even about slavery. It was about the Morrill Act. Senator Morrill wrote an unfair tax bill that taxed the farmers of the South a higher percentage rate than the manufacturers and bankers of the North.
Of course, that's ridiculous. It had nothing to do with that. We all know that the Civil War had a lot to do with slavery, especially with the expansion into the West. The new Republican Party in the North wanted to get rid of slavery because they didn't find it very savory on any level. The Democrats in the South, what would later become the Confederacy, wanted to hold these slaves as long as possible, and they wanted to see to it that the slaves and slavery was taken out west also as the expansion of the West was about to begin. The Republicans says, no, not only are you not going to enslave these people even more, taking them out west, but we're going to get rid of slavery now. And then they formed the Confederacy and tried to secede from the Union.
So 11 delegates from 7 southern states walked out of Congress, leaving Congress Sindai. What does that mean? That's right. That means it died that day. Congress died that day. Another thing, how did he finally become president on his 6th time? His opponent had $5,000 to run his campaign with. Abe Lincoln, because of the bankers of Boston and Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York, had $7 million in his campaign.
Did he? Let's check this out. I've seen this on several websites, and they all agree. The crazy cost of becoming president from Lincoln to Obama. And here we see Abe Lincoln. Look at how much money he didn't spend. In 1860, his campaign was $2.8 million. Today's dollars now is 2011. And if that's 150 years ago, then inflation would have risen about 2,500%. And if you divide 2,500 by 2.8 million, it would have been about $1,000 that he spent. Probably not even that. 7 million. Oh my God, he's so stupid.
Okay, you know how much money $7 million? $5,000 was a lot of money when somebody made $20 a month. And Abe Lincoln had $7 million, right? And he became president of the United States, except for one thing. He couldn't be president of the United States. Why couldn't he be? Because the first Constitution had 13 amendments. The 13th Amendment was called the Tona Amendment, Title and Nobility Act, and no bar attorney could become president. So what did he do?
Okay, I don't even know what he's talking about with that. The first Constitution, there was the Articles of Confederation before our Constitution that we have today, and it had 13 articles. That's why it was called the Articles of Confederation. There were no amendments. And of course, the 13th article was simply the 13 colonies at the time to become states agreed with the previous 12. That's what it was. And of course, the 13th Amendment to our current Constitution is the abolition of slavery.
First day on the job, he signed an executive order bankrupting the United States of America. Next executive order created a corporation out of Delaware under the United States. He made himself a CEO. Not only that, he put the Grand Army of the Republic in charge by another executive order. Then he made himself commander-in-chief of the Army.
Okay. Oh my God, he is so stupid. Here are the first few executive orders of Abraham Lincoln. The first one was establishing a provisional court in Louisiana. He did not make himself a CEO of any state. He did not bankrupt the United States. This man is absolutely crazy. The provisional court in Louisiana was needed because of the rebellion at the time happening in the South. They needed courts, and he provided them with courts. He provided them with judges who actually paid to quell the insurgents. The next one was to address soldiers who were AWOL. And the third one was to arrest felons from foreign countries committing felonies in the United States. This man has no idea what he's talking about.
That's why every president sworn in as commander-in-chief and president of the corporation since then.
So every president since Abraham Lincoln, he being the first commander-in-chief, was sworn in as commander-in-chief after that, and the CEO of our country, because another piece of insanity that the sovereign citizens allege is that the United States isn't a corporation, and because of that, they only pass corporate bylaws, and none of us outside the government are subject to these corporate bylaws, so therefore the laws do not apply to us. This is some of the nonsense they take into court and then wind up in jail. When in reality, as we all know, George Washington was the first commander-in-chief. And there you have that.
No president before Abe Lincoln ever signed an executive order.
Seriously? He is so stupid. List of United States federal executive orders. So nobody before Abraham Lincoln signed an executive order because Abe was so corrupt. He's trying to run a business and he's scamming us all. Let me see. Wait a minute. George Washington, he wrote 8, and John Adams did 1, and Thomas Jefferson, well, wait a minute. In fact, they all wrote executive orders before Abraham Lincoln. Do not go anywhere near this guy. Don't let me find out that you're going anywhere near this guy.
Why didn't they? Because they weren't an executive. You can't be an executive unless you're an executive of a company. I'm an ambassador for Voice of Youth.
No, he's not.
And over 50 sovereign nations have me do their work.
God.
And it keeps me really, really busy. Besides this, and besides getting over 270 children returned to their parents in the last 2 years alone. Okay. I don't need fanfare.
You need a
But
psychiatrist.
what I'm trying to say is this. It threw me off a little bit. See, I've gone to federal courts where someone's actually been tried by a jury and found guilty of felonies, and I meet them right after their trial and before their sentencing, and we walk in and we nullify their trial and their sentencing.
And they
How
go
do we
home.
do that?
And they go home.
Actually, when I sit down and think about it on the computer, I'm pretty good. But when I'm up here, I'm trying to think ahead of myself. So I get it wrong. If you are competent and you don't sign anything and you don't have an attorney, you can't go to jail.
It's that easy. So here's how you do it. If you wanted to go up the street and murder 10 people, burn down a house, go rob Walmart, this is how you don't go to jail. Pay attention. So you can do anything you want, commit any crime you want. You won't go to jail, so pay very close attention.
And you go home. Now, they can throw you in jail for contempt. In fact, they can throw you in jail for contempt 3 times. They can throw you in jail for contempt to try and force you to have an attorney.
No, they cannot.
They can throw you in jail for contempt to try and force you into a plea deal.
No, they cannot.
And they can throw you in jail for contempt to get a incompetency hearing. Now, the problem with incompetency, it's a two-edged sword for the court. So believe me, they want you competent, except in the state of New York. They want you competent. In the state of New York, they want you incompetent because they make a lot of money off mental health facilities.
That is absolutely ridiculous. I've had a little something to do with healthcare in the last 2.5 decades. And half of these places have gone belly up because they're absolutely broke. They find it impossible to live on Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements.
Without even being sentenced, without a trial, without due process of law, they can put you in a mental health facility for a year.
That's absolutely ridiculous. In where I would work as a licensed practical nurse, if you wanted to have somebody committed, you would have to have doctors come in, and it would the same way would work in jail if you were in jail, or if you're going to have a pre-trial hearing. 2 or 3 doctors would have to agree that you need to be seen by a psychiatrist. Then that would go to a social worker. Then that would go to a judge, and a judge would have to sign an order to usurp your Fourth Amendment rights. And then you would wind up there, and not for the rest of your life. You'd go for a 3 or 4 day evaluation. If you had to have some medications changed, you might wind up there for a week or 2 or a month. But he is absolutely crazy. He is the one who should be going for a mental health evaluation.
So be competent, don't have an attorney, and don't sign anything. Don't go to jail. It's that simple. Even after you've been tried by a jury.
That is so ridiculous. It's funny.
You'll stay out of jail. Saved a lady 20 years of her life for 4 felony counts of fraud. Gina Nilsson, I saved her 5 years of her life. Stephen in Utah, I forget his last name, he was going to go for life, and he didn't do anything. They manufactured his case, and he never spent a day in jail. Gina spent almost 90 days in jail, 87 days, because in Utah, they can hold you in jail up to 30 days for contempt. Most states, it's like 72 hours. But in Utah, it can be up to 30 days at a time. So they hauled her to jail for 29 days to try and force her to have an attorney, to break her down, mentally and physically break her down so that she'd accept an attorney. And on the 29th day, they hauled her in for a hearing. And she said, no, I'm not going to have an attorney. They put her back in jail for contempt for 29 days to try and force her into a plea deal. And every time they walked in with a piece of paper to sign, she said, no, I'm not signing nothing. They threw her back. She went in for a hearing. They said, we're going to order a competency hearing. We're going to send a psychologist over to the jail. He walks through the door. She goes, you realize I have a degree in psychology, right? She goes, you realize I have 2 businesses that I run and operate. You do realize that I filed over 700 pages of documents in this court, right? He goes, you're competent. They hauled her back in for the hearing. It was over in 5 minutes. She walked out and hugged her mother. I got a picture of it on my phone. She was already tried by a jury and found guilty. Okay. 3 sentencing hearings. 3. And she was thrown in jail for contempt at every sentencing hearing.
Good Lord. All right, let's take a break, and we will just take a look at who this guy actually is. All right, here is straight versus straight. This is an appeal, after David Straight, after a judge agreed with his wife that an order of protection should be issued against David Straight. And this is an appeal. It says affirmed in part, reversed in part, and remanded in part. Remanded means it goes back to the court and they have to make a more reasonable decision. The part that was affirmed is that, in fact, yes, the order of protection should continue. His own daughter came in and testified against him. Some of the allegations were sexual in nature, and the judge decided that yes. In fact, so here's the guy we're talking about. David Lester Straight Sr. appealed the domestic violence civil protection order. He didn't win that part. Now, the parties were married for 40 years. At the end of the marriage, they owned and lived on 2 adjacent lots in a campground. So this is a guy who's going to China, meeting with these rich executives. He's been in the CIA. He's been in the Secret Service. He has met with Donald Trump. You'll hear that nonsense later. He's been all over the world, saving these people from all over the world. He claims that in another video that he traced his heritage all the way back to King Solomon. Okay, which is, of course, he was alleged to have lived around 950 AD, so almost 3,000 years ago. And he knows where King Solomon's gold is because the government tells him the most secrets. And it's right here in the United States. They're keeping King Solomon's gold because everything's a scandal. And that he is the rightful heir of King Solomon's gold, and he's still trying to get it. And this is a man who's living in a campground. Okay, during the months following the dissolution, appellee David lived on her lot. Appellant, I mean David, however, lived with Wendy Stahl at her residence in the same campground. So he's going around seeing all the other girls at the campground, living with them when his ex-wife lives right next door, and getting orders of protection issued against him. This is the guy we're talking about.
On June the 20th, I was meeting Melania Trump in the Rose Garden. I'm on one of her task forces. And we talked for about 20 minutes, and it was real nice, and talked about a lot of different things. She gave me a little letter thanking me for the evidence that I've turned into the Pentagon has resulted in the arrest of more than 3,000 child and sex traffickers this year since March.
Never happened.
Okay. But President Trump came by, and I'll wear my hat tomorrow that he gave me.
Okay.
President Trump came by and said some nice things and gave me a hat. And I'm thinking to myself, what can I tell this man? Because I'm not going to get much time with him. You know, you're only going to get a little bit. What can I tell this man that's going to make some kind of a difference? And the only thought that came to my head was this. I said, President Trump, our 2018 census said there's 327.2 million people in the United States today. And the corporate charter that set up this corporate government, the Constitution, says there's supposed to be one representative in Congress for every 30,000 people. I said, that means we need 10,907 congressmen. And we have 435. And Congress operates off the Masons meeting manual as their book on how to conduct their meetings. 435 out of 10,907 is not a quorum. I said, they're dead. Their sin died. I said, no law that they pass, no executive order, no nothing that Congress does or the Senate does or any law that's written or approved means anything.
So this is another one that our idiot claims that no laws have actually been passed because of the reasons that he just gave, when in reality, the Reapportionment Act of 1929 clearly states the bill enacted on June 1929 that establishes a permanent method for apportioning a constant 435 seats in the United States House of Representatives. So there are 435 seats in the House per the Reapportionment Act of 1929. There isn't supposed to be 10,000 something or whatever nonsense he alleged. Now, this is the never perfect affidavit I was talking about. This goes for about 100 pages. This is one of the pieces of nonsense that is related to what he just said. That you bring this in the court and the judge goes, oh my God, they know, they're on to us. Okay, case dismissed, go home, never mind, 10 people you just killed. And here it is. All codes, now pay attention, we're going to look at a court case next. All codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lack due process of law. All laws, rules, and practices which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. And he cites these cases here. Remember Rodriguez versus Donovan. Rodriguez versus Donovan. Here is a court case in which one of the sovereign citizens tries to use this absolute nonsense. And this is what they have to say about it. This is part of their discussion, the judge's discussion about it. This is the Nix case. He says Nix's amended complaint also includes non-existent quotes, such as all codes, rules, and regulations are for the governmental authorities only, not human creators in accordance with God's law. All codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lack due process. And what they mean by non-existent quotes is that doesn't actually exist in Rodriguez versus Ray Donovan. He just made it up. He's an idiot. I went through that case, Rodriguez versus Donovan. I couldn't find it either. Then I found this case and it's like, oh, no wonder. It's all a lie. He is a nut. Here's another court case in which the sovereign citizen tries to come in with the legal mumbo jumbo, and their decision includes, right here in this paragraph, in short, the legal fiction presented by plaintiff in the complaint is not based in law, but in the fantasies of the sovereign citizen movement. There is no jurisdiction in this court for fictitious claims. These people are idiots. Don't go anywhere near this guy. You'd have to be crazy to pay any amount of money to be constantly lied to. The idea is to, with this video and hopefully others, to get this guy out of the public arena and just put him back into the campground where he came from.
Because there's no quorum. There's no lawful government. Everything is de facto, which means without fact. It's all de facto. Many banks and bank organizations, and they set it all up for a system of slavery. They set up our United States Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury does not get paid from the United States government. What's that? The International Monetary Fund is where his check comes from.
Okay, does it? Okay, here we see the truth about that. Investopia, what does the Secretary of Treasury do? And it goes on to state the salary. 226 grand a year, not bad. And the general fund of the Treasury pays the salary. The general fund is also referred to as the America's checkbook. And they pay a lot of different government entities. And in fact, yes, the government does pay the Treasury, not the International Monetary Fund. In fact, the taxes that are collected from the people is a very small fraction of the budget. Most of the money that goes into the budget and paying Treasury funds and things like that come from the judicial branch, where they collect your fines and whatnot for crimes.
Okay? International Monetary Fund. That's where his paycheck comes from. One cannot serve two masters. And Chris went in front of Congress and he stood up there and he says, the Bar Association is a monopoly. We do not allow monopolies in the United States of America. I would like you to collapse the monopoly. But I know most of you are bar members, and since you're not going to, and he looked him right in the eye and told him that. He knew they weren't going to. He says, you need to open the practice up to everybody. And my company, E-Clause LLC, should have the authority to stand up in court in any courtroom in the United States that I register my company as a business in that state to practice law just like a bar attorney. And guess what?
Guess what?
They signed off on it. And Kurt Pendergrass and Chris Hallett, John Gentry out of Tennessee, and a few people that I know besides them all work for Chris Hallett, and they go to courts as non-bar association attorneys.
Do they really? In Tennessee? In Tennessee, you say? Oh, the Tennessee Code, attorneys at law. No person shall engage in the practice of law or do law business, or both, unless the person is duly licensed, and while the person's license is in full force and effect, nor shall any association or corporation engage in the practice of the law or do law business or both. You, in fact, do have to be licensed as an attorney. He is absolutely crazy.
And so when Kirk Pendergrass and I walked in with executive orders and slapped him on the judge's podium and said, we're going to be helping Tim Holmseth, he just went, He couldn't think of anything to say. So we talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Okay? So the state of Alabama, I'm finishing up on this. State of Alabama, in my talks that I've been doing for about the last 3 years, I tell people how to properly get married. And that is with a family Bible. It costs you about the same price or less than a marriage license. And you get a family Bible that has the extra pages in the front and the back. And that's where you record your family events. Childbirths, marriages, all those kind of things. You record the event, date, time, place, who's in it, who's officiating it, and get a couple of witnesses who attend, signature. And then you take your Holy Bible with the stuff that's written in it, the event that's written in it, and you take a copy of it, and you go record it at your county courthouse. Now, in the state of Alabama, they went through this process. They took me seriously, and they said, well, the state of Alabama will no longer issue marriage licenses.
Do you hear that? They took him seriously. Our hero. Oh my God, you don't have to have a marriage license. You don't do anything but take a Bible down to the courthouse. Seriously? How to get married online in Alabama. You get married offline. It's just the same way. Okay, additionally, it goes on to tell you that you can obtain a marriage license in Alabama without the need for an in-person visit. So some of the things have changed, but you, in fact, do still need a marriage license to get in Alabama. You can get it now also without going through the ceremony of being married. You can get the marriage license, be married, and then have the wedding and the ceremony. And that is what has changed. He's such an idiot. He's such an idiot. Take a Bible. Oh, my goodness. As interesting as that sounds.
Isn't that cool? You get a family Bible, you record the event, you take it to a probate judge in the state of Alabama, and he will properly publish it and properly record it. And it is Public Law 97-280 by Congress that the Bible is the law.
97-280. Is it really? Is that what it says? Public Law 97-280, joint resolution. We're going to skip all of this. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the President is authorized to authorize and requested to designate 1983 as National Year of the Bible. You might remember Ronald Reagan did that in recognition of both the formative influence the Bible has been for our nation and our national need to study and apply the teachings of Holy Scripture. So that's what it does. It makes 1983 the year of the Bible. It does not say that the Bible is law. He is crazy. Alrighty, let's take another little breather and delve more into the insanity of the insane. All right, well, here's a nice little piece done by Alice Hines of Vice. Very nice job, Alice. I think Evan Osnos should give you a job. How the sovereign citizen movement convinces desperate parents to ignore laws. And these are very desperate people. The people who go to see this idiot and pay $250 a pop to go see this idiot are very often people who are in a situation and they're hoping that this guy can do something about it. But all it does is lie to them constantly. Let's look at some of what she has to say. Here's part of his brilliance. Satanic rituals are performed in this country using children. We have the forensic evidence to back it up. We know where the underground tunnels are. We've rescued children and women who are breeders out from under these tunnels. He is absolutely crazy. Concerning his claim to be a Navy SEAL, he also didn't respond to follow-up questions about his resume. In his seminars, he claims to be a Navy SEAL and boasts of dramatic escapades in Ronald Reagan's drug war. You'll hear a little bit about that in a minute from the idiot himself. But the Navy SEAL Museum holds no record of him, unlike every SEAL after World War II. Strait also claims hundreds of victories in court, reuniting families and getting the convicted out of jail, in addition to personally suing the FDA. His claims are absolutely outrageous. But a search of state and federal court records via Pacer and Westlaw reveals his name as a party only in a handful of business disputes linked to a ranch in Bend, Oregon. It also says here his website, David's website, lists him as a member of Ammon Bundy's defense team. These were the ranchers who kind of set up and had a little skirmish with the law. It was national news. When reached by Vice News, Bundy denied that Strait served on his legal team. Of course, because he lies constantly. Tim Colburn, now this is talking about a guy who's going through a custody issue. Tim Colburn had recently lost temporary custody of his newborn daughter. The Arizona Department of Family Services alleged Colburn and his wife had neglected her and placed the baby in foster care. This is what they did. Now, it's a pretty well-established fact that the family courts are a disaster in our country. Lawyers should be getting near our children. A study done by the Prevention of the Exploitation of Children did determine that between 66 and 80% of sex trafficked children are in fact being taken from their parents by the family courts and put into foster care. And this is where they're emerging from. The same study also determined that only about 20% of the children should be there. This is what happens when lawyers deal with our children. But his allegations are absolutely outrageous. So Tim Colburn and his wife paid David Strait $6,000 so far in 2021. And they personally organized and paid for the space and equipment rental at the Arizona seminar. Okay, so they paid him $6,000 and they paid for all the equipment rental for his seminar. And what was the final result of that? We scroll down here. Vice News checked in with Colburn, the dad fighting the Arizona Department of Family Services, a month and a half after he'd organized the seminar. Colburn was pensive. He had not spoken to Strait in weeks and now said he felt cheated for paying him. David overpromises and underdelivers, Colburn says. It's disappointing because I held him in high respect. Now, this is the kind of person David Strait is, who would take $6,000 from a family who's desperate to get their child back. This is the man we're talking about.
I proved this in federal court in the 9th District. Okay? I showed where all crimes are commerce. All crimes are commerce. You get arrested on a felony count of fraud,
Listen to
$2
this
million
one.
is taken from your successful QV trust by the court for one count.
Okay, now what he's going to explain to you, what he alleges, which is of course absolutely ridiculous, is that when you are convicted of a felony, the judge, the court actually gets $2 million from this secret account that the government holds in your name, and they trade these accounts. They actually, he alleges, this is another one of the nonsense of the sovereign citizen movement, that they use you as collateral to borrow money from other countries, and your Cesta QV trust gives these courts $2 million if you are convicted of a felony. And then he's going to go on explaining how the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney divvy up that money. Can you imagine if a judge is going to get, like he sells you $95,000 for every felony conviction, 30, 40 years as a judge, they would be multi-billionaires. So here's what insanity looks like.
$2 million per count. If you had 4 counts of fraud, that's $8 million. That's how much that court gets. The judge gets $95,000 in net retentions. I proved this in federal court.
He proved it in federal court.
That's a polite way of saying commissions. The prosecuting attorney gets $50,000. This is judge, prosecutor. Now you have what? Defense attorney, person defending you. Do you know the judge and the prosecutor chip in? They give him, out of their share, it's supposed to be a 4,
They
but I
chip
can't
in.
write upside down. $20,000 each. Now you, and I'm using an actual case, paid your defense attorney
It's an actual case.
$27,000. You wrote him a check to defend you. But on the back end, he gets $40,000 if you're convicted. Whose side's he on? Right? This Supreme Court goes on to say the rules, codes, statutes, ordinances, policies, executive orders are not law. They're not law. Now they're making us believe they're law, right? They tell us, oh, it's the law. Every time they say that, I just want to strangle them. You know?
It's all a scandal.
We don't need to be stopped and harassed by the police to do those things. In fact, they actually commit a lot of felonies in their process of doing that. Do you know that when a police officer puts his lights on behind you to stop you, he is creating an emergency where none existed, and that's a felony? The minute he flips those lights on, he created an emergency where none existed.
That is, of course, absolutely ridiculous. I did have a brother at one time, and he was a real deputy sheriff, and it's policy and procedure for every department that when you try to pull somebody over, you put on your lights, if not your sirens. How is somebody to know they're being pulled over?
That's a felony. He walks up to your window, you roll your window down, and he gives you a tacit agreement of being a citizen, a person, a resident within 60 seconds. Here's how he does it. I was a deputy sheriff. Okay?
Oh, he was not.
That's one.
What is it? I'm sorry.
Privity. That's one they all want you to forget. They all want you to forget that there must be privity of contract. You know what that means? Let's just say I have a
Yes, I do know what it means. The privity of contract is a doctrine that pretty much states that nobody can be forced to execute any portion of a contract if they are not explicitly mentioned in the contract. So now he's going to explain something to you that is, of course, utter nonsense.
contract with my credit card company. I forget to pay the bill and they send me to a collection agency. Did I have a contract with the collection agency? No. Chances are the collection agency, for a reduced amount, 50 cents on the dollar or 30 cents on the dollar, bought that debt from the credit card company. What you really need to do is say, thank you very much for that gift. I really needed it at this point in my life. I couldn't really afford to make that payment. Thank you so much for paying my debt off for me. But there's no privity of contract. I don't have a contract with that collection agency.
In fact, they do. If anybody were to read their contract with the credit card company, there is a clause in it that clearly states that if they cannot collect from you, if you do not pay your bill and they cannot collect from you, they do reserve the right to, one, report it to the credit bureau, and two, give it to a collection agency to collect on their behalf. So yes, you do have a contract. They are included in the privity of contract. You do have a contract with them by proxy.
Okay? That's what privity of contract, that's the one they all want you to forget. See, when you were born, when a child is born, it comes out of the water through.
Oh my God, you have to listen to this. This is the most ridiculous stuff I've ever heard. This is so ridiculous. This is funny.
The birth canal, and is birthed at the dock by the doctor, and is named as a vessel. The names of ships are all capital letters, named as a vessel. It arrives at the dock. Its dock is there for port taxes to be taken. Okay? You think I'm kidding?
No.
It puts you in admiralty jurisdiction.
Yeah.
That's how they treat you. That's where the term doctor came from 970 years ago.
Oh my God, that is so stupid. So essentially what he just said is the baby is birthed, and because the baby is in water in mommy's belly, the baby is birthed, and then it's birthed at the dock, and that's why the doctor is called a doctor, because he's at the dock when the baby is birthed from the water, and that puts them in admiralty jurisdiction. This is another piece of insanity that the sovereign citizens will take into court and says, you say to the court, you have no jurisdiction over me because this is not admiralty jurisdiction. I'm in admiralty jurisdiction. And the judge looks at him and says, you need to get yourself a lawyer or you're going to wind up in jail.
Doctor.
Where in reality does the word doctor come from? This is from Thesaurus Dictionary. Doctor comes from the Latin word for teacher and originally referred to a small group of theologians who had approval from the church to speak on religious matters. Eventually, the term saw greater use referring to qualified academic and medical professionals.
Okay. And that's right. And that, by the way, I've used that tactic to buy time.
Okay.
Because they better read the document and go over.
I walk into court and I grab the document, I hold it up
These
in the air
poor
and I
people.
say, have you read it? If you haven't read it, I suggest you suspend this hearing for a later date until you've had a chance.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure they've read the documents.
Our hero.
Because usually by the time they get down to about that 10th page of the document, they're getting a little fearful that they're going to be held on charges. Okay. So.
Are they really?
Absolutely right.
Because these,
I have personally put a lot of judges and prosecutors in jail.
great.
Okay, they are
He's so
not
stupid.
immune.
Is there anything he can't do?
Let me tell you a quick, short version story of my naval career.
Let's hear about his naval career that never happened.
Thank you for your.
When I joined the Navy, I tested a little bit high. And I was a damn good shot because I grew up on 3,000 acres and I could take out a gopher a long ways away. Boy. Coyotes, anything that harmed our animals, I could take them out. Grew up a farm boy. And so what did they do? They shipped me down to San Diego. They put me in the Navy SEAL training program. And
This is so amazing.
it was during Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, and I was shipped to put aboard a ship off the coast of Panama. I was stationed out of Panama. And we would jump in these life rafts, Zodiacs, with a 50 caliber machine.
The reality of that was Reagan did launch a war on drugs, but it didn't have anything to do with Navy SEALs or anybody going into Panama to fight these war on drugs. It was all legislation. The Navy SEALs did wind up in Panama, not in the early 80s when Ronald Reagan was president, but I believe it was 1989 in an episode called Just Cause, where they were sent into Panama to disable a boat and a plane, I believe it was, that was owned by Manuel Noriega. Said he could not escape. Several Navy SEALs lost their life in that excursion. So thank you for David Strait for, again, stealing as much valor as you can from the people who actually did do something.
Gun and some other small arms, and we would go up these rivers, right? And we'd duck under the trees that would overhang the rivers, and we'd sit and wait. And pretty soon, the Navy would send a bunch of Marines in a helicopter over these drug haciendas. They'd land out in the jungle about 3 or 4 cliffs away, and the Marines would work their way up to the front of the drug haciendas. They'd engage the drug army, okay, the drug dealers' army. They had pretty good armies too, by the way. And we'd sit there on the river and we'd hear all the guns going off. And we'd start watching the pathways coming down the river. And pretty soon, the drug dealer and a couple of his guys are running down these paths and they're jumping into a boat on the river. That's where we were, see. One day I'm standing on the boat and we're just about ready to engage. They're right there. They're climbing in their boat. We're just about ready to engage. And boom, I get hit in the chest. I'm wondering, what the heck was that? I mean, did a bird fly into me? You know, adrenaline's flowing pretty high. When adrenaline's flowing high, you don't feel stuff.
Thank God.
And well, I guess I felt something. I pulled this bullet out of my breastbone and I put it in my pocket. It was stuck in my breastbone. And I engaged and we started firing. And we had a dossier on everybody. And we formed these dossiers on all these drug dealers. And certain ones, we're supposed to take them out. Okay. And others that we just arrest. But certain ones, we're supposed to take them out. Well, the bullet was one of our own Marines' bullets. It probably came up through the trees, bounced, didn't have a lot of energy. It just left a bruise about that big and one little trail of blood going down my belly button. And it's hot in Panama, so we were wearing black t-shirts. Navy SEALs can wear whatever they want, right? Or they used to be able to. Anyway, we went through this. I fired. I had to carry this bullet around for like 20 years in my pocket until a hole in the pocket and I lost it. Yeah, it's like sitting there. I reached my pocket and I just kind of feel it every once in a while, you know. But to make a long story short, what happened is I had a commanding officer. And this commanding officer was telling us to kill people that weren't on our list, on our dossier. And I didn't feel good about it. I've always grew up to be a moral, righteous, honest man. So I didn't feel good about it. So I disobeyed a direct order. I turned him in. We all get hauled to Virginia. I spent a couple of years there in Virginia, in JAG, testifying against this guy. And the court case didn't take a couple of years, but I spent a couple of years in Virginia. And I got a choice. I could come work for JAG. They thought I'd be good at it. Obviously, knowing what I know now, I probably would have. But then all I wanted to do was go home. Or I could go home.
my God. He went for basic training. He was so amazing. He scored higher than most. So they sent him down to be a Navy SEAL. So then now he's such an honorable Navy SEAL. He testified against one of his own. And JAG was like, oh my God, you're so amazing. Why don't you come work for us? What is JAG anyway? They wanted him so desperately to join it because he was just so amazing. JAG, of course, is the Judge Advocate General's Corps. A government law organization and one of the country's largest law firms. So he's in the Navy. What is he, 22, 23, 24, maybe, who knows? And they want him to come work for JAG because he's so incredible. He wants him, maybe he can be a lawyer there too. Ridiculous. So there you have it. David Straight and all his brilliance. The idea is to remove him from any access to the public so that he cannot go around stealing people's money, wreaking havoc, and convincing people to do the stupidest things. Hopefully you learned something from this video. And ciao.